Day 1094 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 864,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,280 losses in the past day. And to take a closer look at these figures momentarily, because most recently seen here is a scathing assessment from a Russian point of view that you won't hear from the Kremlin, with a Russian woman sharing her insights on the matter inside of their beloved SMO, stating that Russian soldiers are blocked at every turn, their troops can't advance due to swarms of thousands of drones, and that Russian soldiers need to move from point A to point B across open terrain, which is impossible by vehicle, adding that the Russian army lacks effective electronic warfare countermeasures, but also that, conversely, Ukrainian EW jams their own operations, preventing most of their drones from flying. But also that if their guys make it from point A to point B, they end up getting blasted by FPV drones and artillery, with going on to state that this doesn't mean that Russian forces have taken the position, seemingly implying a Pyrrhic victory, or no victories at all in such cases. She ultimately rounds it off with saying that Russia needs to wake up with how they're proceeding in these engagements if they want to win. And I believe this is also the same individual from Kursk who spoke up about similar issues previously, as she was there to support wounded Russian soldiers in makeshift Kursk shelters, hearing all of these stories that they had to offer. Nonetheless, a scathing indictment of how the Russian military is operating at the front lines. Then as for hardware, 12 tank losses, 18 APVs, 52 artillery, 4 multiple launch rocket systems, and 2 air defense systems, of which one of those was a Book M3 in the Zaporizhia direction. Then to take a brief weekly look at the territory of control, the latest stats, with another week of Russian forces expanding in all directions, everywhere across the front lines, as Putin recently stated and would have you believe. But in reality, Russia used to occupy 25% of Ukrainian land at the height of their land grabs in their invasion. However, these days they are often quoted to have captured 20% of Ukrainian lands, but more specifically, as of today, it's 18.6%, which is up 1/100th of a percentage point from this time last week. As such, Russian forces are still tracking at about 150 to 200 years before total capitulation of sovereign Ukraine, noting that the hundreds of years to take Ukraine is part of a mathematical equation and not just some generic hyperbole. Then headed to the map, with flames and thick smoke lighting up the night sky in Russia's Kaluga region, at a plastics and chemical factory. The fire, reported late last night, has intensified, though no official cause has been confirmed. Speculation suggests a possible link to Ukrainian drone strikes, consistent with previous attacks on industrial sites in the very same region, with this event that would also make for the third plastic and chemical factory targeted inside of Russia within just the last 90 days or so, with the sites having a predominantly military purpose, for example for vehicle parts, ammunition casings, electronic components, but also produces polymers and resins and composite materials used in tanks, armored vehicles, drones, of course drones, and other infantry equipment deployed in the Russo-Ukrainian War. Then headed across on the map to Russia's Bryansk region, or more at an intersecting location between Russia and Ukraine, as it's been reported that Ukrainian forces are amassing just adjacent to the southeast of the Bryansk border checkpoint, with reports of at least 10 brigades preparing for a significant counteroffensive into the Russian region, with General Sursky of the AFU in his recent comments hinting at a major operation on the horizon. If these reports hold true, it marks a bold move by Ukraine, potentially shifting war dynamics to this direction, where a build-up on this axis could force Russia to divert resources, creating a ripple effect across their military strategy strategy. So if this is real and not just a feint to confuse the Russians, one would expect another Kursk-like invasion of Russia. Now, the Bryansk governor has been announcing his concerns for this potential danger for quite some time, although at least to date, it never materialized. But also important to note here is that the AFU has had to maintain a somewhat significant presence in these central northern border regions of Ukraine, just beyond Russian lands, in the event that Russia were to perform its own renewed invasion from the north, indicated in the green on the map, as per their original invasion attempt. So, let's just say that an event like this were to actually occur, a new front opening up into the Russian Bryansk region, enacted by Ukrainian forces, it would lead to subsequent additional pressure on Russia's military, who is already dealing with the active Kursk, Vovchansk, and Donbass fronts, not to mention Kharkiv, and to a lesser extent Zaporizhia, making cause for significant strain on their resources, both hardware and manpower. And it's not at all speculative to say that there would be further resource constraints on their hardware and manpower, given that the Russian army has had to make a great deal of concessions with regards to their own military as time has gone by, because, for instance, with the increasing prevalence of their use of civilian vehicles or motorbikes to storm positions, plus more than just a handful now of crutches mobilized soldiers. Let's not forget the donkey logistics too, with all of these examples pretty much happening right after Ukraine's counterattack into Kursk back on August 6. So if Ukraine has the resources and the opportunity, there should be no doubt in anyone's mind that the AFU to open up a new incursion front would cause significant new challenges for the Russian army, with them only having to further divvy up resources. And by that point, who knows what embarrassing new integrations the Russian army will have to become subject to. Now is the time to guess. Then headed further southeast on the map, as multiple Russian sources were reporting that at least 15 Ukrainian long-range UAVs were traversing the Sea of Azov overnight. Typically, this means the Rostov or Krasnodar regions of Russia can expect fireworks, and in fact, I'll pull one up shortly in the post-edits, but I believe there was a air defense activation in the Krasnodar region as a result of these incursions. Then also on the map, and following recent Russian statements on crossing into Sumy from Kursk, well, as it relates to those claimed events, footage and stills emerged of this location where we see a small Russian entourage of two vehicles pulling up to an opening in Ukraine's anti-tank ditch defense lines, but the predictable bottleneck opening ended in two Russian BMD-2 infantry fighting vehicles becoming disabled from AFU strikes, followed by Russians running on foot back to where they came from. Then also on the map in the last day, we saw the AFU destroying Russian electronic warfare and radio equipment in occupied Ukraine, continuing to force the Russian invaders to operate in an unsafe and poor communication environment. Then also seen was how a Russian soldier wanted to film a beautiful flight but ended up capturing the downing of a Russian Mi-28 helicopter and downed by what was believed to be a Ukrainian FPV drone. And it looks like this is one of the guys from the Chechen TikTok army in the Kursk Oblast taking the footage here. The beard and designer sunnies seems to be a dead giveaway. But back to what happened, an event like this is nothing to sneeze at, because there's only been a handful of downed helicopters as a result of AFU FPV drones to date. Then jumping across to some end-of-week news, and so starting off, as Zelensky met with US Special Envoy Keith Kellogg recently, calling it a meeting that restores hope. Amid recent tensions between Washington and Kyiv, Zelensky emphasized the need for strong, effective agreements with the US. And so these latest talks, which Kellogg described as listening sessions, covering frontline issues, POWs, and Ukraine's quest for long-term security guarantees, did show Zelensky expressing optimism, but the absence of a joint press briefing post-meeting hints at underlying complexity. However, some of those underlying complexities may relate to the following news, where reports suggest that the US and Ukraine have actively revisited discussions discussions around a potential mineral deal, with recent developments indicating a renewed push to an updated agreement. Now, earlier in February, the Trump administration proposed a deal stipulating a US 50% ownership or revenue from Ukraine's mineral resources as payback for prior aid and as a condition for future assistance. However, this proposal was met with resistance from Ukrainian President Zelensky, with Zelensky knocking back the initial draft agreement, primarily arguing that it lacked adequate security guarantees for Ukraine. But now, sources on both sides say the deal appears more likely and is one that complies with Ukrainian law. If true, this would surely mean that there has been some fairly rock-solid security guarantees granted, and possibly a move back to $500 billion of rare earth mineral ownership by the US, as opposed to the much larger 50% stake, which would otherwise equate to trillions. And although there's no perfect outcome here, at the end of the day, most will surely agree that you would want a Western representative democracy to be the one with access to these critical rare earth minerals, as opposed to having them in the hands of, say, Russia or even China, who would be contracted through Russia for their extraction. Then, speaking of billions of dollars, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk took to social media with some frank remarks to say that there's enough talking and it's time to act, stating the need to strengthen air policing and to adopt new laws to finance European defense, and last but not least, finance aid for Ukraine from the $300 billion in Russian frozen assets, the vast majority of which is frozen within Europe. Currently, around 10 billion euros in profits are generated annually from these frozen Russian assets, which are then in turn redirected to Ukrainian aid. Though this figure is but a drop in the ocean compared to the 300 billion that exists, which is looking closer every day to becoming accessible funds against Russian aggression. All coinciding with European nations increasingly updating their defense and security posture amid the military threats faced. Then headed across to another Russian hardware news segment, the latest from Russia's military-industrial complex, in a manner of speaking, because we see here an improvised Russian rocket launcher built from scrap materials, built by Russians and seemingly taking a page out of the Hamas playbook. Though it wasn't as advertised, with some real kickback to it, with the recoil literally throwing the operator out of the video frame. And really, far from a manufactured platform coming from Russia's military-industrial complex, it is instead a DIY shoulder-mounted solution set up as an unguided single rocket launcher, used as a means of some very basic artillery support. Though, given the unfortunate lack of Russian rocket engineers in the field, this makeshift device may never make it off the ground, at least metaphorically speaking. Then to another Russian military mobilization blunder segment, as we see here another Russian who wanted to make money in the war but returned home with a serious injury, who had then since upgraded to the level of crutches after making it back home, but has now had to clean the roads because he has no salary or benefits, getting nothing from the Russian MOD. In the video, he explains how he now resorts to snow shoveling on crutches to pay the bills after sustaining a debilitating injury after just 3 months in the SMO, and where he didn't get paid throughout that entire time. Added to that, he has to pay for his own medical treatment from wounds sustained at war. Also, stated was that he has another month of rehab, and after that, he said that he's going back to the SMO, with an understanding that he will sustain further injuries. Mother Russia must be one of the most deplorable mothers to ever exist. Then to round off the video with the latest from Russia's top propagandist, Syolovov, who has his own ideas on how the future should look, suggesting to create a military coalition between Russia and the United States to divide Europe, with the setting up of their Russian bases in Paris and Berlin. He also claimed of it all that Europe will immediately save on their armed forces, and that they won't have to worry about anything, apparently. So he's pretty much just described the recommendation of going back to another almost half-century long Cold War standoff. Surely nothing at all for Europe to worry about. Except it's the continued rhetoric like this that only serves to further embolden European nations against the Russian aggression. It's suggestions like these from public figures that is not doing Russia any favors. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment, and yeah, thanks for sticking around, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!